Hi guys, my name is Megan and today we're talking all about the books that got me back into reading fantasy books. So as some of you may know, about right around when the pandemic hit, I fell into a massive fantasy-specific reading slump, and I will leave the original video where I talked about it up in the corner if you guys are interested. But from at that point on, I haven't ever really been reading more than one, maybe two fantasy books a year until this year. And it feels so good to be back into a genre that I loved growing up so much. And these are the books that kind of reinvigorated my love for fantasy books. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. First up, I think the one that really truly reinvigorated my love for fantasy books in general is the Circle of Magic series by Tamora Pierce. I am still doing a reread of this series. I still have 2 books left in the Circle Opens, which is the series that comes after this one. I still have 2 more of those to read, and then I think there's 2 more books after that. But this is the series that kind of kickstarted my love for this genre again. She's a writer that I would generally recommend to everybody to read because her books are just fantastic. But this one in particular is following 4 kids who are put into a magical foster home, and they start learning how to use their magic. And they grow together as friends, and they're a little found family. And it's just the way that this world is written. The magic is so integrated into every single character, every single part of this book. It's literally within the foundation of the story building itself, and it's fantastic. And Tamora Pierce just has a way with writing that her books will always be my number one. And this is a fantasy book series that you can get into as a kid and still love it 20 years later, and just it still captures my heart even after the last time I read it as a kid. Next up we have Legends and Lattes. So I know this one is on everybody's fantasy radar. Everybody's read it. It is the cozy fantasy if you're trying to dive into cozy fantasy. But this reinvigorated my love for the fantasy genre just because it was so soft and sweet and just really low stakes, and also that it had queer characters. Who doesn't love a little coffee shop romance moment? It's so soft and sweet, and just you're rooting for Viv the entire time of she's building her coffee shop from the ground up. You're just rooting for her the whole time, and I honestly really loved it for that alone. Next up I have the Captive Prince series. So this one is the opposite direction in fantasy. There's no magic in this world, but it's very high fantasy. It's very much based on Greco-Roman history and also French Bordeaux history, and just the way that those two are mashed up together. There's so much political intrigue in this. It's also, this one also gets really dark really fast, and it's definitely not one that I would recommend to anybody under 18. You definitely have to check the trigger warnings before you dive into this book series because it gets dark. But it's also one of the most queer stories I read, and just the amount of angst and anxiety that this book caused is fantastic, and it's one that I would highly recommend to those over 18. Next up I have That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. So this one is another high fantasy that does not take itself too seriously. It's also a monster romance. The way that the magic mixes into the supernatural in this, and the fact that Cinnamon, our main character, is a foodie, and the way that that's mixed into the story as well. Food is a huge component of this book, but also the adventure that she didn't want to go on happens, and all the friends that she makes, all the monsters that she frees, everything about this book is so much fun. And the fact that it doesn't take itself too seriously is perfect for those trying to get back into fantasy, and it's one that I would highly recommend. The last one I'd like to talk about today is going to be A Taste of Golden Iron. This book really cemented the fact that I want to get back into fantasy books so much more. This one has a little bit of magic thrown in. This is following Kadu, who is the prince, and his sister is the sultan, and she just had a baby, so he just wants to spend all the time with his sister and his niece. But there's a lot of court and political intrigue going on behind the scenes. There's break-ins, and his sister puts him in charge of the investigation, and there's a lot of shenanigans going on in the background. He gets accused of being a traitor, and he's falling in love with his bodyguard who doesn't really like him, and eventually he does like him back. But just the anxiety rep in this is so fantastic, and the really soft love story going on beneath everything else is so much fun. And just, this is a chunky book, and it's one that I would highly recommend, especially if you're looking for a fantasy that does have a little bit of action, a lot of political intrigue, but also it's got a softer love story in it, and it's got a great group of friends, and yeah, it's one that I would highly recommend. It's honestly one of my favorite books of the year, and I couldn't recommend this enough. All right, so those are some of the books that got me back into reading fantasy. What's a book that got you back into reading a genre you didn't think you would be reading again for a long time? Let me know down below. If you guys like this video, don't forget the like button. If you haven't already but would like to, go and hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to follow me on social media for more bookish stuff, check out the links down below. Alrighty, bye guys.